Hello, everyone, and welcome to the welcome remarks and keynote of APNIC 52. My name is Sienna Perry from APNIC, and it is my pleasure to host this session with you today. Thank you for joining with us. We hope that you, your families, your colleagues are safe and well. I'll hand over in a minute to APNIC EC Chair Garab Abotaya to officially open APNIC 52. However, I'm just going to do some quick housekeeping first. Please be mindful of the Code of Conduct, which is published on the APNIC 52 website and will be put in the chat box right now. In this session, comments and questions are thoroughly encouraged. We have left some time for some good discussion at the end of Kathleen's presentation, so I would encourage you to have a think about what you would like to ask her. It's a great opportunity. You can either use the raise hand function in Zoom and you'll join the queue for voice, or use the Q&A button on Zoom for text, and I personally will read out your comments or questions. Please state your name and affiliation first, as per normal meetings. Use Zoom chat for any questions you have about the event or using Zoom, or any issues not actually related to the presentations. And more help is available on the APNIC 52 website. Now the fun bit. We would love to see you in action at home or in your office. So please share a selfie of you contributing to APNIC 52 with the hashtag APNIC 52. There will be prizes daily for the best selfies. And also, you can join the conference chat between sessions to mingle with your peers, talk to APNIC staff, speakers, and sponsors. So I would like to officially ask Garab to welcome us to APNIC 52.
Thank you, Sienna. To all the APNIC members who are here today, Paul, Kathleen, others here who are putting the event together, my fellow AC members, and the community from all over the world. I'd like to start by saying good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are watching this from, wherever you are participating it from, and whatever part of the world you are in. Welcome to APNIC 52. This is the third time we are doing this. APNIC 49 was the first time we went fully online. And I think now we are getting quite used to it. Even though when we started going online, I don't think we anticipated that, we'll be doing this for the third time. And so I can only hope that, we'll see you somewhere face to face, hopefully in a safe manner in the near future. I'd also like to point out, like in the last roughly 2 years of online conferences, a lot of us are in workplaces, can't get away to a conference like we used to. So we are juggling our work, day-to-day responsibilities. And for those who have made time, and I can see we have almost 136 participants today, and many more watching on YouTube. Thanks for being with us. Thanks for participating. We do have a great program. I will not elaborate on it, but starting with Kathleen next, please attend the program. The program committee has put a lot of effort into it. And of course, as at any APNIC meeting, we also have the different SIG, the policy SIG, and eventually the APNIC members meeting, where I will present the EC report as well as the Secretariat report. What is very encouraging is, despite the pandemic and us going virtual, our regular partners, APIX and AP Star, have continued to meet around our conference. They actually had their meetings yesterday. So thanks to them as well for continuing with the tradition, despite not having to come face to face. So before we begin the conference and the keynotes, I would like to speak about something that has popped up, or you may have heard about, and a few of our members have asked me about it. This is about the legal challenge that has been brought against AFRINIC, the RIR for the African region. Disputes happen between RIR and their members from time to time, and generally we would not comment on this matter at all. However, this dispute has attracted a lot more attention. And so we thought it was important that we inform the community of what's going on and what our position on it is. So if you're not following the discussion, the Afrinic is currently defending itself from a legal action by one of its members, Cloud Innovation Limited. The legal action follows Afrinic challenging Cloud Innovation breached its agreement with Afrinic as well as Afrinic policies on the use of IPv4 resources. So basically, RIRs have a duty to ensure that resources are used according to community policy and service agreement, including, for instance, that declarations made during resource request processes are true. So anyone who's gone through our application process at any RIR, you make a certain amount of declarations and the expectation is that those will stay true. Like at APNIC, this is a very serious process, and we have canceled membership and reclaimed resources where we have recovered or we have uncovered serious breaches of those declarations by members. APNIC supports the similar kind of approach at all other IRs and the RIR's effort to follow their own rules or own policies, because without that kind of diligence, the policies created by the internet community and the resource management system would not function as we deem it to function. And so, I think that's where we are. Afrinic has had to go to court to reclaim resources, and they are now mired in a legal dispute. Right now, Afrinic is sustainable and is able to do its job. It means that they are not running out of money. However, unfortunately, an order granted by the Mauritius court as a part of this legal case has affected their access to funds by freezing Afrinic's bank account. This is an unusual action due to the size of freezing order and the fact that the main legal claim has yet to be heard, let alone determined by the court. Subsequent to the initial order, Afrinic has been given access to funds to cover operating expenses, and we understand they are working through legal channels to lift or vary the court order freezing their accounts as soon as possible. APNIC and all the other RIRs stand ready to provide funding if that is requested by the Afrinic board through the Nro Stability Fund commitment that were established in 2018. If you're not aware or if you're not followed through this discussion back 3 years ago, the Nro, which is the joint organization of all the RIRs, created a RIR Stability Fund that is to be used when RIR is in distress. Our commitment to that fund was 5% of our reserve equity in total. So we have a reserve equity for operating APNIC for up to 18 months right now, and our commitment was 5% of that would be available for the Stability Fund. Today, which it stands to be roughly around 1.8 million Australian dollars in maximum. Even though we have the money, we don't expect it to be needed. And in case such funding is needed, it is given out as a loan, not as a grant. So we are, so that the RIR that receives the fund is fully accountable towards it. We are committed to this process because the smooth operation of the internet number system continues while this legal process is ongoing and heard. APNIC, along with all the RIRs, are providing support through the Nro. We do not know how long this legal process will take, but APNIC, along with all the RIRs and the Nro, has stood behind and is ready to support as needed. And then, part of this is also that this is an example of how the RIRs have worked together. While Afrinic tackles his legal cases, we are concerned or we are committed to keeping the stability of the internet and the number system intact. And in this case, the cooperation between the RIRs is very important. In near future, you might see other RIRs making statements in the same matter, but given that our meeting starts today, I think it was opportune for us to make that create that awareness with the membership. Now, having laid out our situation with Afrinic, let's continue on. As I said in the beginning, last 18 months, roughly more than 18 months, because the last time we had a face-to-face meeting was in Melbourne, and it seems like a long time ago. Everybody has had extra load. We've had to cope with the pandemic, plus especially those who work on the internet, we've seen the amount of traffic increase to a level that we had not seen before. And so we collectively have been able to hold the infrastructure together. And we are still growing so fast. So which means that there's something right. And the system has proven itself that we can sustain it. Even though in the beginning, there was a lot of worries that the infrastructure may not cope. That was the past 18 months. At this point, looks like the next 18 months, we'll still need to figure out what our next situation is going to be. We will see, I hope that the public health situation will improve throughout our region. And as the pandemic begins to subside and vaccination rises, we may be able to go back to some face-to-face events, or at least have some sort of hybrid events. Until then, let's continue here. The energy is strong. I watched or participated in the newcomers session earlier today. Really excited to see more than 100 people on the call and active participation. Thank you for that. We also had substantial number of participants in the tutorials yesterday, which I attended as well. So let's keep that going. And by popular demand, I think the last time we had that, we now have a permanent chat room so that your chat does not disappear with the Zoom session. So you can, go to the chat room and try to create that informal environment we used to have in the corridors of whatever conference center or hotels we are in. And yeah, feel free to ask questions. And you will always have support from the APNIC staff and moderators and our volunteers. And again, before I end, APNIC meetings are also about the Internet Resource Policy. And this meeting or this conference, we have an interesting policy that has not come up for a while about changing the length of our minimum assignment. And it is an interesting one. So I think that it'd be quite interesting for a lot of you to attend and participate in. And having said that, we will be around. I'll be around. The rest of the APNIC EC will be around. So will all the other 6 chairs participating in various forums in the chat rooms. So please reach out if you have any questions, or we'll have an open forum in the members meeting. You can also raise your questions there about APNIC, our activity, our plan, and so on and so forth. Thank you for coming to the opening session, and I formally declare APNIC 52 open. Thank you very much. Back to you, Sienna.
Thank you so much, Gareb, and I'll hand directly over to Paul Wilson. Please take it away.
Thank you very much, Sienna. Thanks, Gareb. Hi, everyone, and welcome to APNIC 52. I'm Paul Wilson. I'm the head of APNIC here in Brisbane. And this is APNIC's 3rd fully online conference. I really do thank you for showing up here from wherever you happen to be. I'm hoping we have a chance for a face-to-face meeting by this time next year, maybe. We can't be sure, but in the meantime, as we heard earlier, as Sienna said, we do hope that you're all coping with restrictions and lockdowns and staying safe and well. I'd like to encourage you all to stay with us here at APNIC 52 during this week, because we do have a packed 4-day program, a lot of fascinating content. I can say the APNIC team and plenty of community volunteers have put a lot of work into this, and there's something this week for everyone. program started yesterday, actually, and we had community meetings and tutorials, but today we launch the conference itself with some great keynotes. Firstly, with Kathleen Moriarty on the role of operators in transforming internet security. Then a panel led by Jeff Houston on the disclosure of incidents and breaches. And finally, I think it'll be a fascinating account of the network infrastructure behind the recent Tokyo Olympic Games later on today. We've got more today on security, on routing and IPv6, on the environmental impacts of internet operations, and women in ICT. Tomorrow, we've got a packed day, again, with the first security track, a next-gen careers BOF, a technical session on DNS and DNSSEC topics, the latest there, and also the APNIC products and services session, which is going to bring you the latest developments as they've been happening here, mostly at the Secretariat in terms of products and services for APNIC members. Finally, on Thursday, we've got a half a day of policy discussion with 7 proposals, I think, to be discussed, and that's a record for recent meetings. And that'll be followed by the member meeting, which is open to everyone as usual, where you can hear the latest reports from the APNIC Secretariat, the EC, and the community as well. So today, we're well on our way through 2021. And at the last meeting at APNIC 51, I described APNIC Secretariat priorities for this year. And that was under 4 themes, which I've also described in a series of blog posts since then. So those themes are, I'll just go through them briefly because they say a lot about what we've been working on at the Secretariat here during the year. Firstly is what we call the Next Generation Registry, and that includes work that's being done quite intensively on RDAP, the Registration Data Access Protocol, and RPKI, and also on the development and deployment of APIs for programmatic access into the registry and membership databases, which are being launched later this year with APIs for the NIR community. The next generation is core business for APNIC as an RIR, and it's a multi-year effort, which you'll hear more about into the future. The second theme for this year, for 2021, is online participation. That's our continuing effort to bring support to the online community through online events like this one, through online training, through online interactions. And we're launching a new online platform, which is in trial at the moment, to facilitate those interactions as much as we can across the community. So this is prompted somewhat by COVID. It's a direction we've been taking for some years, and naturally COVID has accelerated the moves to online community. But even after COVID, if we can return to a normal or a new normal, we really hope to continue a much greater level of online activity and inclusion for the whole community into the future. The other thing for 2021 has been to build our capacity for internet development. With new funding that's come in for expansion of training and internet infrastructure in the region, APNIC's scaling up to be able to deliver more in this area. That's allowing us to accelerate development of registry products and services as well, and that's something you'll see tomorrow. Finally, on APNIC agility, the fourth and last theme, we've been rolling out agile processes across our technical teams for quite some time, and more recently in our non-technical teams and in the new product management teams. So we really do see agility as the perfect word for how APNIC needs to respond these days to work in this environment through COVID, but not only through COVID, but a lot of other changes that have been taking place and no doubt will continue to take place in the internet environment in coming years. So those are 4 themes for 2021, well underway, and that's a summary of what we've been doing so far. But I hope you'll join on Thursday this week at the member meeting to hear more in detail about the progress that we made this year. Also, as I mentioned, the products and services session, which will go into a fair bit of detail on that topic as well. So, of course, there are plenty of other sessions between now and the end of the week, and I really do hope to see you there. I wish you a very enjoyable and useful and fruitful APNIC 52. So I'll hand you back to Sienna now, and let's get on with it. Thanks again for being here.
Thank you so much, Paul. I'd just like to call out what's going on in the chat. There's a really amazing thing here where people are sharing where they're tuning in from. We've got Myanmar, PNG, Kathmandu, the Solomon Islands, Japan. I mean, it's the Philippines. It's just brilliant. So I would encourage you to keep doing that, because even though we're not all together in the same room, Seattle, we had someone from Alaska before. It really makes it feel like we're at least virtually in the same room together. Mauritius, brilliant, keep it coming. So I now have the extreme privilege of introducing someone who has won an award that I think very few people in the world have the right to claim, which is she is one of the top 100 women fighting cybercrime in the world. Now, if that is not a superpower, I don't know what is. That is not the only thing that Kathleen is famous for. She's also been the principal in Dell Technologies Office for the CTO. She's currently the Chief Technology Officer for the Centre for Internet Security, with over 2 decades of experience. She has contributed in a very significant way to the IETF, and she is with us today with our great gratitude. Kathleen, would you take us away?
Thank you for the very generous introduction. I'm excited to be here today, and with the goal of inspiring each of you to raise the baseline for security for service providers. And so I'd like to get into the motivation for that. And let me just pull up some slides that might help follow along, especially if folks are, I'm not seeing my slides, so I don't know. Oh, there we go. I am not seeing my slides, although I've shared them. I might need some help here.
Kathleen, if you stop sharing your slides and re-share, we can see your desktop currently. And I'll take this moment to say, I forgot 2 of the most exciting places that people are joining from. We'd like to welcome our colleagues from Afghanistan and Myanmar today. Certainly not an easy feat to join from those locations. So welcome and thank you. I think we've got, yes, success. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And sorry about that. So I'd like to encourage each of you to think about your role as a service provider and how we can raise the bar for security. And I'll begin by talking about the threat landscape. Threat actors are increasingly attacking our infrastructure. They are increasingly sophisticated. They're going after, in some cases, low-hanging fruit, and that might be through the supply chain. The supply chain has been a very prominent attack vector over the past few years. And this has only grown over the last decade. I suspect it will only continue. And one of the later trends, which I would imagine many of you are aware of, is to attack through service providers and managed services. The threat actors have different objectives. Depending on the nation they're coming from, they're influenced by cultural norms and identity that may shape what we see from the attack. And although what we've seen in the past has held true to some degree, even spanning kinetic to cyber warfare, it could change. But what we have seen, if you take a look at SolarWinds, they came in through SolarWinds software. That would have been very difficult to detect because it was an attack that began with development, and the code was signed, right? Signed and accepted into environments. But it was a great way to get into many, many networks. And the end result of that was we had thousands of compromised networks, and we had data exfiltrated from a number of those networks. Looking at the threat actors, in this case, Russia, disruption is the typical theme. So in my mind, SolarWinds isn't over yet. Although a lot of organizations have cleaned up their desktops, we don't know what's going to happen with that data. Another example of a pretty big attack from this year was in the January timeframe with Microsoft Exchange. Chinese threat actors were behind the original exploit using a zero-day threat, which is an unknown, unpublished threat, and they were able to exploit that threat and gain access to systems. Once that vulnerability was announced, it was used by other threat actors as a day one exploit, so a known threat with a patch. So systems that have not yet been patched against that. For threat actors from China in the past, what we've seen a few things going back even to post-Cold War period, is that they will attack if they have an assurance that they will be successful. So if you take a look at the advanced persistent threat attacks from a decade ago, they were successful. The attackers were able to exfiltrate data, and the intended purpose behind those was to advance capabilities. So it was economic. Day one exploits we're seeing from Iran, who has become increasingly sophisticated, and they often come after a theme of, with a theme of revenge and have some reuse. So I guess about a little over a year ago, there were some attacks in the US against the financial sector. So not necessarily direct against the government who was imposing the sanction, but against the country. And they used VPN exploits that were published. So that is a theme. Now, each of these represent some pretty sophisticated threats with some outcomes that were damaging to those impacted. They require system rebuilds and infrastructure that's resilient and ready for those rebuilds so that you could eradicate a threat actor. This is extremely burdensome for any organization who is the target. And then at Center for Internet Security, we work with the state, local, tribal, and territorial networks in the United States. We have over 11,000 members. And what I'm talking about here are the most underserved, the organizations with the fewest resources. We all have them in our countries, and we have to do work to help protect them. But how do we do that amidst these increasing threats? I'm going to dive in and show you what they're faced with. So organizations today, we ask a lot of them for security because over the last few decades, the whole time that I've been doing information security, we've expected organizations to deploy a firewall, an intrusion prevention system, perhaps some DNS filtering that happens within their organization, deep packet inspection, web filtering, governance, risk and compliance, threat intelligence. Each one of these services requires a full-time employee. If you think about that across all of the organizations, this is how we have reached that 3.5 million person deficit for security professionals globally. We've architected our networks to a point where it's really impossible to manage them. And then on top of that, if you think about threat intelligence, which might be a space newer to some of you, so I'll explain a little bit about what happens in this space. Organizations, and I'm talking about large organizations, take in upwards of 8 threat feeds. They aggregate the information that has indicators of compromise in them. So it might be an IP address, it could be a hash of a file, it could be some piece of information that if it shows up on your network indicates that an attack may have occurred or may be in process of being attempted. Why do they get 8 different threat feeds? They're afraid to miss a single indicator that might show a compromise in progress. This is a burden. Additionally, when they receive that information, it's not integrated. They have to have somebody on staff who can apply out those controls and put it in each of these boxes. This is a really large task that only the most sophisticated of organizations can handle. Yet this is what we're asking, and we're continuing to promote information sharing in this model. So it just goes to show some of the models that we've been following and the problems with them, and that we have to think differently. We have to think about scale. Oh, and to top that all off, I've been hearing a lot of calls from people to say that we need a threat hunter in every network. Just don't see that happening. We have to think differently. But why now, right? We've had these problems for a long time. I think there are a few trends happening right now that can be the pivot point for a dramatic change where we raise the baseline for security and what's expected and what's provided, and that we think about these underserved and we transform how security is managed so that it's not the burden that it is today. Strong, ubiquitous encryption. This is a major driver that I think can be really a big part of that turning point. A few years ago, I undertook what was a controversial IETF draft at the time, RFC 8404. If you read it, you'll maybe scratch your head and think, why would this be controversial? It was merely documenting the impacts to operators of encrypted traffic. And I worked with Al Morton at AT&T on this. It was fantastic to work on it with. But it really went to show where the struggle was with encryption at that time. Now, we've seen it deployed and we've seen some things break, but I think many have come to the realization that this means we're going to shift control. So all those middle boxes I had in the last slide, a lot of them should go away if we do this correctly. If we bolster security at the endpoint, we can do it in a different way, which I'll dive into in subsequent slides, where we harden our infrastructure and we move to an allow list approach, away from the deny list approach of antivirus and the indicator of compromise example I gave a few moments ago. And this would disrupt threat detection, because if you know your baseline of what you expect for your controls and your measurements on a system, anything unexpected would be flagged. Additionally, there's a lot of work happening right now on software bill of materials. What software is expected on your system? What's permitted? That also provides an allow list for software. It's going to take a few years to get there, but this holds promise in terms of how do we do this transformation. And then on top of that, we have to think about behaviors. I think that would be the one other aspect to figure out, how do we form allow lists? The manufacturer usage description in the IoT space does just that, but for IoT devices. How do we scale that up? These are some things to think about. We also have the protocol stack evolution. And this, I think the operators on this, in this venue are so familiar with, right? Because you've seen TLS 1.3 get widely deployed and quick. It's starting to move into the enterprise, so the organizations that you support, through vendors adopting these protocols. You've already made the move to routing overlay protocols, and some of your customers are doing that now. IPv6 is prevalent on many service provider networks. And I think this protocol stack evolution will help to drive IPv6 adoption within organizations, at least the large ones who realize, once I allow quick on my network and TLS 1.3, I have less visibility on the wire. Now, service providers, from the study we did on RFC 8404, you're not going into the transport layer, so it's not as much of an impact to you. But for these other organizations, you could use IPv6 for network troubleshooting. And so this might be an opportunity for service providers to help their members and the people connecting through their services to make that transition to IPv6 for that added visibility on top of their encrypted sessions. Anytime I've given that explanation and I've gone much deeper, I've gotten a lot of uptake. And within a month, I've seen organizations start to transform and adopt IPv6. So it's possible. Data-centric security or zero trust. This is a big theme. And it's having a large impact because this is also part of how we will transform security. With that shift to the endpoint, it's not just a shift to the endpoint. We're becoming more granular. We are thinking about how do we isolate functions as they execute in memory. So the whole process of how your data stays encrypted, remains encrypted, and in some cases even executed upon while encrypted is being worked on. So strong encryption, strong authentication. It's imperative to have strong authentication. If you're not, if your organization is not using strong authentication, especially if you're managing many other organizations and you're a pathway into their network, this is a very important step to take to prevent a threat actor from remaining active on your network. And dynamic authentication, where you have a re-authentication process with credentials that can't be replayed, is critical to reducing the threat and reducing what's called the dwell time, the amount of time an attacker can live on your network. Automated verification tied to built-in security is something I hope to see in the next few years as well. And I'll dive into that a bit more and would encourage anyone who's interested to learn about the attestation technology. In the IETF, we have a working group called RATS, the Remote Attestation Procedures Working Group. And what's different is this technology will help us to simplify that verification of controls, policies, and measurements for the end user. So if you think about our constituents, the state, local, tribal, territorial networks, and it includes K through 12 schools, it includes hospitals, organizations with very few resources. If they had a capability to buy systems or use cloud-hosted services that were already secured against trusted measures, but then were continuously verified in a way that required no touch for them, we would get a lot further, right? And so it shifts where we're thinking about security and where it gets done. So I do think we're at a point where embracing these trends would lead to disruption. We could get rid of some of those middle boxes. We could change how security is done. We could potentially crush that information security professional deficit by moving to built-in or intrinsic security that relies upon validated and trusted assurance, but also architectural patterns that scale. I think that's the key part here that I hope is imparted on each of you, is to think about not necessarily the specific examples that I gave, but how can you innovate and move to architectural patterns that scale? An example of that would be the CIS benchmarks. This is a free tool. CIS benchmarks are consensus developed configuration guidelines. So there's experts on each of the benchmarks that come together and form what should be included when you harden a system, right? And so these are very detailed guides that you can walk through to decide how to harden your system and meet policy requirements. There are over 100 CIS benchmarks. You can just go to the CIS webpage, download them, use them for free if it's for within your own organization. If you're going to be offering a service, then there's partnership requirements. But for your own use and to bolster your own infrastructure, these are free for use. What scales? You have a small number of people who create these benchmarks, who are experts, and then it's replicated by use by many others. Another way that this could scale is if you're offering this as a service to organizations so they don't have to do that hardening themselves. They don't need the resource to develop to that level and to have the expertise to make the policy decisions and then to configure the systems or to create the image that gets replicated or the container that gets replicated according to the security guidelines. And if we can go a step further to having these automated and verified on a continuous basis, by a small group of experts that create that verification, as opposed to what happens today with, I mean, they're great protocols, the security content automation protocols. And however, what we've observed is they've been around for over a decade and adoption isn't good. And it's because of the configuration demand at each organization. We have to remove that. The CIS controls is another measure that can be taken. This is also free. So the controls, if you're using ISO 27001 or 2 for your security control frameworks, those are fantastic frameworks. They're very thorough, but how do you go after the biggest threats? Well, the CIS controls provide a prioritization and map into every control framework. So you could take the first implementation group, which are specific safeguards within each of the controls. And by implementing implementation group 1, you'll know that you're going after the 5 biggest threats that were faced in the past year. There has been work done to map the CIS controls into the MITRE ATT&CK framework and then into each of the major breach reports from the past year and the subsequent year. And so we know that the implementation group 1 addresses those top 5 threats. So that's a major step that you can take within your organization as well. And it scales because you're using the work of a few people and spreading that out. Now, for service providers, what else could you do? I'm going to provide just a few examples of where you can scale and where you can think about those underserved and under-resourced organizations. I might not have the complete list here, but my goal is more to inspire each of you to creatively think about scale and patterns and that scale and raising the baseline for security. Manners. I think many of you are participating in Manners, implementing against BCP 38. So providing your ingress and egress filtering capabilities. If you're not, please look into Manners, please look into these capabilities. And RPKI, that's another great effort where if the service providers are helping on particular services, then the organizations who don't have these capabilities can rely on a higher baseline of security. DNS scanning services. Now, this could get down to discussions on censorship. However, we have a big problem with malware. And at least from the multi-state information sharing and analysis perspective at the Center for Internet Security, we're seeing huge gains and protections using a DNS scanning service for all of our underserved. This is a free service for them. So they're able to sign up for this service and they're able to get some protection so that if a user clicks on a link, they won't get the malware downloaded to their systems. These are some service offerings that you should think about because if we as a whole on a global scale are able to reduce the threats within our own environments, we will do a better job of preventing our own network from being a launching point or from our own customers from being attacked. Email authentication. This is a tough one. The Global Cyber Alliance has a lot of tools available for free. And so you could either point people toward those tools or perhaps provide a service to help people transform to using email authentication. Help them set up DKIM, help them provide signatures on their outbound email and SPF so that they know which email services or which email servers are expected to be sending email for a particular domain, and then DMARC reporting. So this has been difficult. I fully acknowledge that. However, if we can reduce mail spoofing, we'll have a shot at reducing the threats faced through phishing and other attacks that are email-borne. DNSSEC and DNSSEC validation provide DNSSEC validation as a service and IPv6 transition support. So that one might be a bit tougher, but I do think it will come. Built-in security. So for infrastructure, application, or hosted service providers, think about how you are offering built-in security. And is it easy? Or do your customers have to do a lot of configuration support? Can you make it easier for them? This is critical, because if you are asking organizations to sign on to your service, you're providing great security benefits, but it takes a really sophisticated person to implement the security policy, as opposed to say, I want level 1, level 2, level 3, and that's what I'm going to pay for, and it's provided. There's a big difference. We really need to move to easy so that we can crush that 3.5 million person deficit globally. We also need automated verification. That also has to be easy. That verification to policies and measurements should be provided from the vendor or from the service provider. And then you can think about different service offerings. I've talked about a few earlier, such as DNS filtering. DDoS is an obvious one. I think the service providers know they own that space and they can do it most efficiently. And that's where it scales best. Mail screening, MX record-based mail screening is an option whether your customers are using cloud or on-prem mail services. So can you do something along those lines to help the organizations who don't have resources to do this themselves? So with that, I'd like to encourage you to think about architectural patterns that scale. I've given you a few examples. I'd like to inspire you to think about your own examples. There's a few more in the book that I published last year in case you would like to learn more and think along the lines of how do I architect solutions for security that scale so that we can crush this deficit and we can get ahead and we can raise the baseline for information security. Thank you.
Kathleen, thank you so much. What a brilliant, insightful and clear presentation. We have questions already for you, so if you don't mind, I'll start by reading one out. It's from Afifa Abbas, and she is from Bangalink. She says, I have seen people reluctant to implement CIS benchmarks entirely because of the operational interruption within the organisation due to some settings modifications suggested by the benchmark. And we're having a hard time convincing cross-functional teams to implement them entirely. What would be your message for them?
Interesting. I guess I would want to know a little bit more about the infrastructure, and I'm happy to have a conversation with you and get you in touch with experts as needed. There are some infrastructure that would be easier, right? If you're working with containers and you implement a container, you can test it out more easily than a core router, right? So depending on the infrastructure you're talking about, I could see the challenges being different. There's also an opportunity for expert participation in the benchmarks. So, I'm sure this audience has more than a few experts that might be willing to contribute to them. I'd have to go deeper. So I don't want to give an off-the-cuff answer, just do it, because I don't know the infrastructure you're dealing with and the problems, but I would be more than happy to go deeper and get you in touch with any of the benchmarks experts for a particular benchmark, since there's over 100.
Kathleen, we've taken a note of that, and I would also suggest that on the conference chat might be a way for people to continue particularly that discussion. I am mindful, Kathleen, that it is very late where you are, so you may not be joining us on the conference chat afterwards. I'm going to ask Alvin Abuke he's raised his hand, so he's going to ask a voice question. Alvin, can you please start with your affiliation and ask your question? He's lowered his hand, so we might go to another question. We have a question from Naga. I have a question on zero trust for an enterprise. Not sure if it's relevant to this session. Encrypt and log everything will be a gigantic task for a large enterprise. Dynamic trust calls for additional intelligence built into the infrastructure. Automation of trust? How can that be trusted first? NPE and human, achieving automated trust seems challenging, with multiple vendors trying to trap their customers into product ecosystems. Please share your thoughts on how one can automate verification in a zero trust implementation.
That's a great question. I actually had deleted some zero trust slides from this for fear of going over. So this talk almost had some of the answers to those questions. For zero trust, it's a journey. My preferred documentation for zero trust is NIST 800-207. And the reason for that is it's pervasive and it's not from a vendor view. I would caution anyone about, getting locked into a particular vendor as opposed to the mindset for zero trust, and to look at your infrastructure and figure out where you are today and where you want to go next. There are multiple ways to prioritize your zero trust journey. One could be based on threats and the mitigation. So you could use the CIS controls. And I actually have a mapping on an APNIC blog that shows how you could prioritize your zero trust journey. I got deeper with a large organization recently, and we walked through some examples. And for them, it seemed that building from a cloud native architecture was the most logical starting point for working towards zero trust and not getting overwhelmed with a specific piece. If a specific piece is overwhelming you, that might be one to save for later in the journey. I think that going after built-in security and verification and moving that to a more granular component level might be easier for a number of organizations. If you're able to do multi-factor authentication, so strong authentication, that is also another good step. You might not get to the point where your authentication is dynamically verified just yet, but take this in steps, right? It's a journey. It's going to take a while. And this is a big question. So I'm not sure that I'm answering it as fully, but it's another one where I'm more than happy to go into. I've written a few blogs on zero trust and how do you approach this. And I could have a really long conversation with you to help learn about your environment and figure out what would the next steps be. But just thinking about how you get more granular, can you apply verification on a component or two as opposed to an entire application, right? So how do you inch towards this? And logging, yes, logging everything is cumbersome. So you'd have to change your infrastructure to support that ability. And I think one of the other problems is that we don't have consistent logs, right? Encrypting everything, I think, is not as hard once you get your infrastructure to the point where it's hardened and verified. Then the encryption part is easier because you're not relying on middle boxes that intercept traffic to detect problems anymore. So you've taken on that shift, and that will enable the strong encryption piece.
Thanks, Kathleen. We've got two further questions, and I think that will be the end of questions. So Brajesh Jain kindly asked, what are the measures end users can take to be secure?
Okay, that's a great question. So end users, patch your systems. Whenever there's a patch update, it's imperative that you update very quickly. If there's been an announced vulnerability, there are attackers going after that vulnerability almost immediately, especially in this remote environment that we're in today. They're part of your workforce, and it's a backdoor into your networks if their systems are left vulnerable. So patching is really the biggest piece. If it's users for your organization, I'd say harden their systems. If it's a less technical friend that you're advising on a system and what they should purchase, go for something that is potentially a minimized operating system that takes the burden of securing it and managing it out of their hands more. I think in time we will move to more minimized operating systems, and you can even see with some documentation on Windows 11 coming out, They're looking to simplify things. They're looking to see how they build in security and zero trust. So, move away from more complex operating systems where possible. And of course, that doesn't work for developers and engineers. But for the population that it does work for, do they need a big, robust system, or do they need a browser? So think about the resources needed and move to one with a smaller attack surface, if possible.
Thanks, Kathleen. Final question from Pragya Nigam. Is there some kind of checklist against each vertical on the controls and service provider security?
Oh, interesting. So I am not sure. I will have to get back to you. There are some verticals covered, but I don't know if service provider is offhand. So I'm sorry I don't have that answer.
Sometimes the answer I don't know is exactly the right answer, especially in complex situations. What Kathleen does know, though, is a lot. And she has written prolifically for the APNIC blog on a lot of these different topics. So I do encourage everyone to go and check those out. They're a great resource open to the whole community. Kathleen, I'd like to extend our extreme gratitude for your time and expertise here today. It's been really a pleasure hearing your thoughts, and thank you again for being so generous with your time halfway across the world and probably very late at night. I am going to ask everyone to be aware there's a session poll to give us some feedback that will come up shortly. We're about to have a 15-minute break, and you must use that break very efficiently because the next sessions are going to be huge. We've got the technical keynotes. We've got Jeff Houston, Jared Mauch, Sean Donnelly talking about lessons learnt from global outages, and then followed by Wataru Saito talking about operating the network for the 2020 Olympic and Paralympic Games in Japan. Really actually very special topics. So I do encourage you to come back refreshed. Thank you all for joining us at the opening session today. And I hope that it's been useful and valuable for you, and see you in the next few sessions.